As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Wednesday passed a resolution to pressure President Biden to escalate U.S. involvement in the Ukraine war by supplying Kiev with longer range missiles. The bill calls on Biden to immediately arm Ukraine with the Army Tactical Missile System, known as the ATACMS, and these missiles have a range of up to 190 miles, and the ATACMS can be fired by the HIMARS rocket systems that the U.S. has been providing Ukraine. So providing the ATACMS would give Ukraine the ability to hit more targets inside Russia, potentially. The Biden administration claims that it does not want Kiev using the weapons to hit Russian territory, but the restriction does not apply to Crimea. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced $1.3 billion in new economic aid for Kiev at a meeting on Ukraine's reconstruction that was held in London, known as the Ukraine Recovery Conference. So according to the State Department, the $1.3 billion will go toward general economic assistance to repair and modernize Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and support for Ukraine's commitment to energy sector reforms. The $1.3 billion is being drawn from spending that Congress has already authorized for the Ukraine war, which at this point totals $113 billion. The State Department said that the new aid is in addition to the $63 billion in U.S. assistance that's been provided to Ukraine since Russia invaded on February 24th, 2022. So that's the total that the State Department is saying, and this is the funds that are going directly to Ukraine. That $63 billion includes $40 billion in military aid, although the Pentagon did just say that they overvalued weapons, that they found some more money, claiming that they were overvaluing weapons by $6.2 billion. So I think their adjusted number is that they've sent about $34 billion in weapons to Ukraine. So Zelensky told BBC that this counteroffensive that Ukraine launched earlier this month is going slower than desired, as Ukrainian forces have not made many gains and they're taking heavy losses. Zelensky told BBC, quote, "Some people believe this is a Hollywood movie and expect results now. It's not. What's at stake is people's lives," end quote. President Biden calls President Xi a dictator after Blinken's Beijing talk. So this is really just unbelievable. So on Tuesday, President Biden called Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator, and this is just one day after Blinken met with Xi in Beijing. So Biden made the comments at a fundraiser event in California, saying that Xi was embarrassed by the Chinese balloon that wound up over U.S. territory in February. Biden said, quote, "The reason why Xi Jinping got very upset in terms of when I shot that balloon down with 2 boxcars full of spy equipment in it is he didn't know it was there. No, I'm serious. That's what a great embarrassment for dictators when they didn't know what had happened," end quote. So, a little jumbled there, but you get the point here, saying it's a great embarrassment for dictators. And so Biden has repeatedly claimed that this balloon had 2 boxcars full of spy equipment. We haven't seen it. They did recover some debris, and they haven't shown evidence to show that it was a surveillance balloon. For their part, China maintains that it was a civilian weather balloon. But what's interesting here is Biden is acknowledging that China did not mean to fly the balloon over the U.S. and that it was blown off course due to unexpected weather. He said, quote, "That wasn't supposed to be going where it was. It was blown off course up through Alaska and then down through the United States. And he didn't know about it. When it got shot down, he was very embarrassed," end quote. So again, we knew that from a lot of reports in the media and U.S. officials speaking to the media that it was blown off course, and people have shown it, tracking the balloon from when it was launched. But it's just interesting that Biden's admitting it, and there's all that hysteria, that big frenzy. You remember they shot down 3 more things that we don't even know what they were. They were probably people's hobby balloons that cost, like $10 and are really small. And they used $400,000 missiles to shoot them down. So this is a pretty big escalation in Israel's military actions in the West Bank. So this is from Middle East Eye, this article. The Israeli military killed 3 Palestinians in a drone strike near Jenin on Wednesday in the first aerial attack in the occupied West Bank in nearly 20 years. So the Palestinian Civil Defense said that the remains of 3 men were found at the location of the strike, but Israeli forces were withholding the bodies. The Israeli military confirmed the attack and claimed that it targeted a squad of Palestinian fighters near the Jalama military checkpoint, which sits around 5 kilometers north of Jenin. So the Jenin brigades said that 2 of the slain men belonged to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement's military branch. And it said the 3rd man was a leader in the Fatah-affiliated Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. So they were affiliated with these militant groups. So they're saying that this is the drone strike is the first, aerial strike, aerial targeted killing in the West Bank since the second Intifada in the early 2000s. And this is a huge escalation. And they're saying, the people that Middle East Eye is talking to is that they think this is going to become, Israel's probably going to do this more now. They've kind of, now that they've launched this drone strike, we might see more. And this comes after there's been lots of raids in the West Bank. There was recently just a big one in Jenin, and I believe more people have died from that. The death toll now is at least 6. A 14-year-old girl that was wounded in that raid succumbed to her wounds, I believe on Wednesday, and died. So there's just a lot of violence. So after that raid, there was a Palestinian, 2 Palestinians shot and killed 4 Israeli settlers. And then after that, there was another one of these big settler rampages, in several areas in the West Bank, lighting cars on fire.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
You have another article that's coming out tomorrow, No Warrant, No Problem. And it's about how there used to be a thing called the Fourth Amendment. It seems to not exist anymore. Could you explain it, please?
Well, the Fourth Amendment, thank you, Gerald, and thanks for the kind introduction. As people watching us now undoubtedly know, the Fourth Amendment was written to secure the right to privacy. It expressly guarantees that right and expressly says the government can only interfere with that right when it gets a search warrant based on probable cause of crime sworn to under oath to the judge who signs the warrant. So when the feds want to surveil us and they don't have evidence of crime, but they just have an insatiable attitude for information about us, here's what was revealed last week. Avril Haines, not well known to the public, but Joe Biden's director of national intelligence, she's the nominal boss of the 16 federal spying agencies that the government acknowledges, delivered a report to the Senate in which she revealed that her agencies regularly purchase data about us from the entities with which we are unwitting custodians. As an example, they want to know where I drove my truck in the past 2 weeks. They will go to General Motors and say there's a computer chip in Judge Napolitano's truck. Download the computer chip and send us a bill. And General Motors will say, well, he voluntarily drove the truck. He's voluntarily telling us where the truck is going. So, yeah, we'll give you that information. That is doing indirectly by buying it from a private entity what they could never do directly, getting a search warrant because they have no evidence of crime. So they do this in massive numbers. It's massive warrantless spying, from the manufacturer of your motor vehicle to your computer telecom, to your bank, to anybody else that has records about you. And she revealed it. Did anybody in the Congress complain? One senator, a hard lefty, who's very good on civil liberties. He's terrific on civil liberties and privacy. Senator Ron Wyden, the only one who complained. They should strip from the budgets of these intelligence agencies all funds to do this. They should fire and have prosecuted anybody who does this. It is a blatant violation of their oaths to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution.
America was a colony under the British. They had the Stamp Act. And could you explain more about that?
The Stamp Act required that everyone in the colonies, not in Great Britain, or there would have been a revolution there, everyone in the colonies have a stamp on every piece of paper. So every book, every pamphlet, every letter, every financial document, even a poster to be nailed to a tree. You had to go to a British government post office, really, and buy the stamp. Now, it wasn't a stamp like we use today. It was more akin to a rubber stamp, which they put on with a stencil, and it was a British regal insignia. So the issue is, how did the British government 3,000 miles away know if their colonists were complying with the Stamp Act? They gave British agents and soldiers general warrants. A general warrant says search where you want, seize whatever you find. It doesn't specifically describe the place to be searched or the person or thing to be seized. It isn't based on probable cause of crime. It's based on government need. what the hell kind of a standard does government need? Whatever the government wants, it'll claim it needs. The government wanted to get into the homes of the colonists under the pretext of looking for the stamps. What were they really looking for? They were looking for revolutionary materials so they could predict who was going to foment resistance to the king.
The United States has become the country that our founding fathers fought against.
Yes.
And it's the mentality of Great Britain, those lovely, lovely Brits who speak so properly, and the sun never set on the British Empire as they slaughtered millions of people around the world and stole whatever they wanted and killed whoever they wanted to. But
Exactly
you have to
right.
say it properly. And that's become America. What's your
Yes.
favorite war? You like the Vietnam War? No, I like the Iraq War. I like the second Iraq War better than the first Iraq War. I like the Afghan War. How about the Libyan War? Hey, about that Yugoslavian War? What Yugoslavian War? Oh, you mean when NATO, when the Bill Clinton attacked Yugoslavia and destroyed the place?
Mhm.
Oh, forget that. Don't even talk about that. Oh, how about Assad has to go? Oh, we only killed, about 700,000 Syrian people have died since Barack Obama said Assad has to go. We become the country that our founding fathers have fought against. They've robbed us of our rights every week. Every week, you are writing about how they've robbed our constitutional rights.
So when Jefferson and company coined the phrase taxation without representation is tyranny, do you know what the highest tax rate was collectively, because it wasn't on income, imposed by the Brits on the colonists?
Yeah.
3%. Today, if you lived in New York City and made a good income, it would be about 59%.
Yeah, and that's something.
Well, 3% was enough for a bloody revolution. What is 59% enough for?
Yeah.
Wow.
You're
exactly right. We have become the country from which we rebelled.
Yep.
Far worse, far less freedom, far more confiscatory taxes, far heavier and intrusive government than Jefferson and Madison could ever have imagined.
Look what they did with the COVID war crap.
Correct.
Close down your business. I'm the governor. I'll tell you what to do. Look at that little piece of crap you got over there, that little Murphy boy. Oh, where did he come from? The Goldman Sachs gang?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. How about that arrogant little boy we had over here, Andy Cuomo? I'm a daddy's boy. I'm renaming the Tappan Zee Bridge after my daddy. Close your business down. I'll tell you what to do. Yes, sir. Another sad note. One of my sayings is when all else fails, they take you to war. And someone just called me this morning and said, we hear you say that all the time. But the other thing is when war fails, they'll take us to nuclear war. And the Ukraine war is failing. And you just sent me an article that you wrote, and it's very, very, very powerful. Could you explain more about that and what's going on?
It was a statement on the internet posted by the head of FSB. FSB is the Russian CIA. Now, we all know that each of these, I know you don't like this word, but they call themselves this. Each of these intel agencies spy on each other. The CIA spies on Mossad. Mossad spies on the CIA. The FSB spies on the CIA spies on the FSB. We all know that. The head of the FSB said last night, we know from spying on our partners and our enemies in the intelligence community that the Western nations now realize that Ukraine is losing and will lose this war. They realize it internally, and they know that we know that they realize it. And yet they are still funding the war. He's 100% correct. We know from the documents that kid, Jack Teixeira, has been indicted, kid in Massachusetts, for revealing that the entire Pentagon, the brass in the Pentagon, is of the view that Ukraine can't win the war. And still, we're sending billions and billions over there.
Yep.
But House votes to censure Adam Schiff. It has not been a good day for the congressman from California. First, he was owned by John Durham while the Democrats attempted a character assassination. And now the House of Representatives have voted to censure Representative Adam Schiff on June 21st. Now, we're not really talking a lot about the Durham's trip before Congress, but there was a lot going on with that as well. But he was voted on the censure. And a lot of people on this vote said, who are those 6 Republicans who voted president? We need to get them. Well, thankfully, Anna Paulina Luna, who's a representative who brought forth the legislation, she explained why those voted president. If we can put that next one up. And I think it's important to see this. For those wondering who voted president, members who sit on ethics traditionally vote present, as they do not weigh in on investigations prior to them coming through the committee. This is typically the case on both sides. Also, although Representative Thomas Massie and I disagreed on my first resolution, he did assist me in helping with some of the votes for the new resolution that passed. Thank you to all who worked together for accountability. And the real reason I bring this up, and we kind of took Massey's side on this, and you certainly did when you said, hey, where's this $13 or $16 million coming from? That was his big objection to it. And he was piled on by a lot of Republicans, by a lot of people. Oh my gosh, Massey sold out, he's a terrible guy. No, he stood up for the Constitution. Congress doesn't have this authority. I think that Adam Schiff is as much of a creep as everyone else does, but I'm not going to break the rules to punish him. I'm just going to say he stood by his values, and he won in the end, and he won the right way.
Yeah, and he has a reputation that really helps him out on those issues like that. Because if it was just immediate and it was a one-time deal, you can get hit pretty hard. I can remember one time, I think it was a vote on Cardinal O'Connor.
Oh, yeah.
and I voted no, and I was the only one. And before I got back to the office, there were a few of you standing there. Oh, you better watch. Boy, they're calling from all over. But I think somebody came up from the staff and said, oh, yeah, it's the New York Times. They really want to talk to you about that. and the staff talked to him before I didn't talk to him. And the staff kept talking to him. They said, oh, he votes against all those gold medals. And,
the air went out.
It was nothing to it. They have to find that, gut-wrenching controvery. So it wasn't controversial, which is making the point that, if you have something, you tell your people what you believe in.
Really, I think Adam Schiff is the poster child for all that was wrong with the Russiagate, because he, through the end, and I think what was most despicable about what he did, and we've talked about it on the show, is that he hid behind his position as House Intelligence Committee chair and said, I've seen concrete evidence that President Trump colluded with the Russians. I can't tell you, of course, because it's classified, but it's concrete evidence. And I can imagine a lot of people, and we know there are good people that do work in the intelligence community. Of course, there's a lot of bad things that go on, but there are decent, honest people. And I can imagine those people being furious, because what he did was he weaponized the intelligence process, the process of analyzing intelligence information and coming to conclusions. He weaponized that for political reasons and used it against Trump and the Republicans. That's absolutely despicable, but it also undermines the credibility of the intelligence community itself.
Right.
They said, early stages of Ukrainian counteroffensive, quote, not meeting expectations, Western officials tell CNN. And this is from the article, Dr. Paul, and I think this says a lot, and I think it vindicates a lot of the people that we know as good friends, Scott Ritter, Colonel McGregor, and others, who were saying this from the beginning and were ridiculed and harassed and being accused of all sorts of things. You're just being in the pay of Putin. Well, it turns out, as usual, they're right. If we can put this next one on, this is from the CNN article. Remember, this is CNN talking. And when CNN has to admit even this, then you know something's going on. Now, I highlighted one part of this. Now, this is hard to read, and I apologize. But here's how the CNN article starts, Dr. Paul. In its early phases, Ukraine's counteroffensive is having less success. And here's the part I underlined, Russian forces are showing more competence than Western assessments expected, said 2 Western officials. The counteroffensive is, quote, not meeting expectations on any front. It's failing across the entire front, in other words. But the part that's important, I think, Dr. Paul, and it goes to the entire way that foreign affairs analysis works in Washington. Russian forces are showing more competence than Western assessments expected. These assessments are based on politics rather than analysis. How many times do we see Russia's running out of missiles? They'll be out of missiles next week. It happened for the entire year. It doesn't matter if you like Russia or hate Russia. But when you have the whole military establishment together with the media saying Russia's losing, Russia's going to lose, Russia's weak, it's disorganized. You can't organize your foreign policy based on this kind of circle of lies.
But the propaganda people have done a pretty good job on putting those lies out, and most Americans still believe it. And what they're what they were repeating all the time. The war is the attack Russia did, in not too many months ago, invaded Ukraine. So it was always Russia against Ukraine. At the same time, they say, well, if maybe Russia is in a more defensive mood than an offensive mood, because they have the power and they can do a lot more. And but they don't ever say, well, how did the war really start?
Yeah.
What if the war, since the beginning, for let's say even almost 9 years now, it started by us throwing out one government and again putting another government in and dealing with a coup back in 2014, and it's all been based on a lie. And from that point on, if there would have been more of the people you mentioned and the other few journalists that they have to put this in a perspective, without getting in a position to say, the Russians or either the Chinese, they're angels and that's why we do that. We look at it more objectively of what we have done, and that to me is a big deal, because this just like you put up those clips about the people who were lying about the insurrection and all that, they lie through their teeth. But here, this whole war, in many ways, is built by a lie. Especially, what about the documentation of the diplomacy since World War II, and especially since 1989, and the comments and the promises that we have made, and that's important. But you just don't see that on the mainstream media, not at all. And yet, there's still a lot of people, slowly but surely, are being exposed to the truth, and it's starting to make sense for them. But that's the problem, though. It's still that we're behind because the propaganda machine from the far left and the media is pretty powerful.
There are real consequences to believing your own propaganda, because it leads you to do things that you otherwise would not do if you took a rational approach to things. And if you look at one of those, some of the propagandas, we have the strongest, best equipped military in the world. Well, you're sending your best things in there right now. NATO is sending its best military equipment into Ukraine right now, and it's getting absolutely slaughtered. Those Leopard 2 tanks, the Bradleys, they're burning like marshmallows over an open fire. So you have a danger of being too reckless when you believe your own propaganda, and I think that's what we're seeing here. It doesn't matter if you like what's happening or you hate what's happening. There's a danger in doing that. But the other thing from the CNN article that I wanted to point out, Dr. Paul, if you could put that next clip, because you said this early on, and you were criticized for being, he just is go back one if you don't mind. He just is taking Putin's side. Now, this is Mark Milley. He said this is a very difficult fight. It's a very violent fight. It will take a considerable amount of time and a high cost. And Secretary of Defense Austin said, the Ukrainians have the ability to recover equipment that's been damaged, repair, There will continue to be battle damage, but they have a lot of combat capability. Now, the point here is both of them are saying there is going to be enormous losses here, but they've got to keep going. And you wrote very early on, they're trying to fight Russia down to the last Ukrainian. And here they are literally admitting that that's the goal.
The opposition that I claim has most of the control of mainstream media and influence a lot of people in the country. And they do this with a tone of moral high ground.
Yeah. Here's a neat tweet from Rand Paul that came out yesterday. Senator Paul said, the good news is that Ukraine caught their highest judge hiding some of his more than $2 million in bribes in pickle jars. The bad news is that Ukraine, consistently ranked as one of the most corrupt nations on the planet, still has high-ranking officials robbing it blind. He continues, this might be a salient point when Ukraine returns to Congress for beg for more U.S. taxpayer funds. Why won't Democrats accept my call for a special inspector general to oversee the billions of dollars we send to Ukraine? To which Elon Musk responded, some accounting of how American taxpayer money is being spent sure sounds like a reasonable request. Hear, hear. So that was kind of a neat little exchange, and we said it from the beginning.
We need to hear more of those kind of tweets, right to the point, and that's good. And of course, Rand's been on that for a long time.
Yeah, he's the first one. Hey, I know I can't stop the money going, but can we at least have someone look over it? No, shut up.
Yeah, prepare for what's coming, but they'll wait 10 years when we are bankrupt, and they say, we ought to check that. But then they ask, we need to audit. They get their audit of anything the Pentagon's been doing no easier than I get the auditing of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
The big stuff is sort of secret, behind the scenes. Even secret from the government.
What is wrong with his reasoning? Again, I'll wait till Aristotle, because one of Aristotle's main assignments in metaphysics was to answer Heraclitus and answer Parmenides. And to do so, Aristotle carved out certain concepts which he originated, which had never existed before, and which we use to this day. And he said those were the only concepts by reference to which we could answer Parmenides. So we'll see when we get to Aristotle. Now you see that people are in a very dreadful position philosophically now. We have a catastrophe almost at the very outset of Western philosophy. One philosopher with an array of arguments that seemed persuasive at the time to prove that everything is change and there are no things. Another philosopher with an array of arguments which seemed convincing to prove that nothing changes and there's only the motionless one. What are we going to do to reconcile these two philosophers? To take their arguments and somehow make sense of it all. That was the task of subsequent philosophy, never properly answered till the time of Aristotle.